taking us through solving problems with tech. And today we're going to have Brian Hawi taking us through internationalization, the introduction, chaos, trade-offs, and lessons. We're going to be having Q&A at the end of this session, but during the talk, feel free to post your questions on the chat for the call. If you're watching from YouTube, feel free to post it on the comments, and we'll be addressing them towards the end of the call. And finally, if you like our content, please subscribe and also check out the rest of the workshop sessions that we have recorded on the YouTube channel. And Brian Hawi, we're very excited. I personally have a lot of question marks around internationalization, so take it away.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. I will share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Take it from the top. First of all, thank you for organizing the session, and to all the organizers, thank you as well. I will be start. I'll just leave it there, at least for now. Yes, so just as Ryan has said, my name is Brian Hawi, Yambo as well. I shall be taking you through internationalization. That is normally a mouthful. As you can see from the screen, it could be a Z or S, depending on where it is. So Z at least is US, and S is Z is US, yes, and S is probably UK as well. So I'll be taking you through this session, and probably you may or may not see why it's a little harder than you may think it could be, but that is also upon you. But as we go through, just a little about me. My name has been said. I have worked as a software engineer for at least 7 years. Over the last 5 years, I've been mostly on the front end side of things. I currently work at Medable, and that's via Andela. Medable is a clinical, I would say, clinical trial platform, and they provide software as a service to big pharmaceutical companies trying to carry out clinical trials. So let's say they want a particular medicine to be in the market, so they can use our platform to carry out the trials from beginning to end. Little fun facts, I've been a stage manager and actor for numerous stage productions at Alliance Française via the Strathmore Drama Society. We used to adopt various classical plays like Pillars of Society, which are the one, Lady Windermere's Fan, that was by Oscar Wilde. And at least we would have various sessions where before we would stage the play, we would at least just have a critical analysis on how we could adapt certain pieces of the text to a Kenyan scenario. Yes, I do love swimming as well. I've won several medals, although I don't know if I can be as competitive as before. Right now, I just bend float like a log when I do go for swimming. Yeah. Right. Let's get to at least an understanding of what today's session will look like. So we would probably just understand what internationalization is, and cases where you would be lost in translation. There'll be situations where some text is translated but didn't make sense in certain contexts, and the consequences of that. I'll explain, show probably just a few examples on that. And we'll also go through a brief history and probably architecture that's involved and how we've probably moved from what we were before and where we are today. And then we'll have a demo session on just how to probably include an internationalization library into your code. That'll be mainly with React, and I'll talk about the other library I'll be using. And then we'll start. I'll show you probably how you may want to start your project. Maybe you already have an app built, but you don't know probably what may be involved. You could probably, I'll show you what you could start with. And then we'll dive a little more into the common problem patterns you face and best practices you probably want to adopt as you move along. Yes. So what is this mouthful of a word, internationalization? Well, according to the W3 consortium, it's just the design and development of your product, application, or your content that enables easy localization for target audience that vary in culture, region, or language. So you want to translate, at least if you put it in your web application context, you want to translate all the strings and all the content that's there to a different language. So there'll be cases where you want to make it to a specific language, and there are certain cases where you want to just make something that's known to everyone. So all that is just a form of internationalization. And as we go along, at least the overall goal for that, at least I found Dan Abramov's description of it probably quite clear and precise. And at least as you can see, it's just if you're moving to a space where you want your app to be used in multiple countries, multiple places all over the world, you want a case where you support multiple layouts, because there are cases where you need, say you go to Middle East, you probably want your application to be mirrored. So that's right to left layouts, and all this effort necessarily is shifted away from the engineers. And that is, when I say shifted away, that goes probably to maybe you would have people on your team like localization managers, and maybe a third party who will do all the translations for you. By third party, I mean other third party companies who will deal with the linguistics of all that is on your app. But overall, we want a situation where we want to be asking the question, how do we support different languages without sacrificing latency and responsiveness? So probably you've also had globalization and localization. So internationalization is I would say, overall term for that. And globalization is making your resource accessible to people, and make it accessible by different people for different cultures. So an example is just a messages icon. At least the envelope icon or messages icon is pretty known across all cultures, at least as far as I know. So probably that means an email, you've received something, or it's maybe you want to see your direct messages or something like that. The delete icon could be something like a dustbin. So probably you are definitely deleting or getting rid of something. Localization is making a resource accessible to a specific locale. So we're in Kenya, so maybe you want the day, the months of the year to be, or the days of the week to be in Kiswahili, in maybe whatsoever reason that you want. So you want to see them in that specific language. So in this case, it's Swahili, you want it to see it in Kiswahili. You don't want to see something like Thursday in English. You want to see Alhamisi. Yeah. So I'll take you through probably a video on how Disney and Pixar do it. I hope the sound will work. If it doesn't, Brian, please let me know. I'll try and play it. Ryan, can you hear the sound, or should I share
I
my
don't
sound?
think we can. I think you should share some.
see. Share video, I guess.
Share
That should be
audio.
fine. Audio and okay, let's try with audio. Need to stop screen sharing. I'm going to see. Can I share my video? It's asking me to provide a YouTube link, I guess.
When it comes to Disney
Okay.
Pixar films, we all
Is that audible?
know about the story,
Yes, it is.
characters, and infamous Easter eggs. What's lesser known is how these films are altered for an international audience. It's not just what you hear,
על מה את מדברת? אני עובר כאן כל הזמן. זה קיצור דרך.
but also what you see. Here is our look at some of the most interesting examples of Pixar adapting their films for an international audience. Let's start off with something as iconic as a film's title design. Toy Story 3, for example. Simply seeing this image probably sparks a nostalgic response for most of you. However, that image might not feel the same for someone in Russia who was accustomed to this version of Toy Story 3's title art. This is similar for about every film throughout Pixar's catalog. Let's take a look at this scene from Ratatouille. On the top of the screen, you'll see the English version, and the French version is on the bottom. Abundantly full of words, this scene is an example of how the visuals of a movie greatly differ depending on where you view it. You can begin to understand the thought and consideration that goes into creating multiple versions of every single film. Take, for example, Ellie's iconic adventure book in Up. Here are some examples of what that book looks like in several different languages. An alternative option to translation is to replace the words altogether with images, making that particular moment read more universally. The English version of Up features a money jar with Paradise Falls written on it. The international version, however, has an image of Paradise Falls instead. Rather than translating Paradise Falls into several languages, the image automatically makes it comprehensible on a global scale. This is the same treatment used in Monsters University. Rather than translating the scare games, animators replaced it with Greek letters. The same applies to Randall's Cupcakes. Faces are drawn on the cupcakes for the international version. International viewers, however, will miss out on the quick gag that you see here. What's especially interesting is when the changes you see are a direct reflection of culture. For instance, animators replaced broccoli with bell peppers in the Japanese version of Inside Out, since broccoli is widely enjoyed in Japan. On a similar note, when Riley's dad is daydreaming, the American version shows a hockey game being played. In the international version, this has been changed to soccer, since it is a much more popular sport around the world. All of this goes to show the time and thought that is invested into making Disney Pixar films unique and appropriate for viewers across the globe. Keep your eyes peeled for how the films vary depending on where you watch them.
Yes, so that's just, I hope I'm still audible, Brian. Yes.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, so that's just how at least Disney and Pixar make an international movie. So now I'll probably now jump into Lost in Translation. This is where now cases where translation isn't done correctly, and there are going to be pretty much consequences for that. So TikTok is one example where they didn't translate the privacy statement, and therefore they were fined 750,000 euros for that case. And I haven't followed too much about it, but yeah, it's definitely an issue if you don't make your, at least the content in your application available in specific locales and languages. Another interesting example is KFC. When they opened the franchise in China, they decided to make some bad translation, and now it's finger licking good translates to eat your fingers off, and that caused some brand reputation along the way. So that was really interesting. Yeah. Another, at least part of the other consequences that are there. So you could lose money. There are cases of accounting errors. So something like, I think in South Africa, they use, at least for the decimal point, they use commas instead. And so maybe something like 56.7 is 56.7. So those need to be translated appropriately in your web application. There'll be fines, of course. There are cases of poor user experience because maybe the context is misunderstood, and probably that's not good for your users. And then brand reputation, of course. And of course, you'll have to spend a lot of time reworking your application. So those are cases where you can just be completely lost in translation. So that's the whole idea and why it's important to make sure if you're going international, make sure you have addressed a lot of things. So I'll probably just jump into history and architecture from here. And at least in the past, maybe the 1980s, 90s, things were really slow because of the waterfall model, of course. And translation was done at the end of the software development cycle. So things with multi-year projects, they were really done at the end, and you get all the technical writers to read the documentation, see the app, and then provide correct translations. The linguists will do this all at the end of the, at least near the end of the process before the whole product is released. So, or at least they would do it at a separate stage. So it was very slow and expensive, and this is still somehow being done today. And if you're probably not aware of vendors helping out with this situation, you could be continuing this process. But I guess we've moved to a case where things are a bit more agile. So I'll address partly some of that. So this is a diagram of how things used to be. We, the engineers, would be on this side of stuff, and we mostly interfacing with the localization manager. We would probably send over our base file, depending on what language you are. So if you, let's say you start with English, you'd send all your English strings to your localization manager, and probably they would send it to a vendor. And depending on what they have, maybe they do have a system, they would do the translation. They'll probably have access to your code. Not code really, but to your web application. They'll be given maybe dummy accounts and the like, and they will at least probably try to understand the context and translate your strings appropriately. So if you have things like French, German, there'll be different linguists handling that. They'll test your app and your application, and they'll provide the necessary strings. And of course, this is slow, and so we've moved over to a probably different approach, and that's now where the vendors themselves here, the vendors themselves have moved to using cloud and probably REST APIs at the same REST APIs as well. So they have to now, at least on your side of the code, you would make an API request to get all the translations for a particular locale. So like when you immediately you start your application, you probably fetch all the languages that are being used, and then you have them on your, at least if it's front end, have them on your front end. If it's back end, have them on your back end. And then you can switch to the particular language according to your needs. So this at least is a bit easier, but still has its issues. So just some of the steps involved, you just create a project, you would upload the keys or the strings, or at least all that is put into one file, and you start the translation process. That means just sending over or at least uploading it to the vendor. Maybe they have a section where you can upload the file, and then they would test and at least change the strings accordingly until all the whole process is done, and then finally maybe you can download the strings and close the project. So this was at least better, but wasn't the best. There's still a better approach. Why? Because there are cases when I can jump ahead a little. There are cases where now you have version 1 of your product that's starting or it's being released, and you've already sent the English file, but then and you're already starting on maybe version 2. But then the cases where you have to provide a patch fix because something is broken in production or something didn't work correctly. So this is just a simple example. The cases where you have to release version 1.1. So that means you'll be sending in more strings. It depends on the situation though. Maybe you added a button, it was completely necessary. So you added a button, a label, something that needed translation, and it was completely necessary. And so you have to probably provide more fixes. And mix this with an agile scenario where now you're and maybe you have multiple release cycles. This is going to be a little crazy for you, and it can get quite hectic, at least on that front. If I can show you just a diagram, at least now things are a little more different. You'll be sending in an upload file for maybe version 1, and maybe that's translated. But these were just temporary projects. They weren't really set up to work as a permanent scenario. So this can get chaotic depending on your release cycles. So ultimately, or at least as per now, you want a situation where you want a continuous workflow of translations, such that maybe I can show you with the diagram. Yeah. So you want so project A could be version 1 of your product. You can upload the base file, base language that you're using, and that is the first thing that's translated, and that's a permanent project. So when you move to, let's say, version 1.1, version 1.1 is its own project. It can be changed later on. It can be done, or I'd rather say a lot of things can be done on that. Like you can have multiple QE validations, and in this case, at least the projects are permanent, and that means that you will not have situations where version, let's say product A needs some strings from product B because product B is its own thing and product C is its own thing. So what will be happening is if set up correctly, you'll have make an API request to fetch strings for version 1, maybe that's in product A, or version 2, and at least that's a continuous workflow. Now this has its advantages. So you can have localization and still have like parallel development at the same time. So you can still work on version 1.1, but strings on version 1.0 are still being worked on. And I've mentioned this, they can perform multiple linguistic QA validation and detect issues at least faster and fix it for that particular project. And then this saves at least engineers time. You don't have to dig through commits saying, hey, this changed on this particular issue, on this particular version, it has to be changed back to what it was. This can be really time consuming. And then at least that allows localization managers to provide maybe additional feedback, context to vendors, and really they now are focused on other particular things and not probably helping you dig out histories, why this was changed and all the like. Yeah, so overall, you probably want to reach this particular scenario, and at least that would be a good situation for that. Next, so I'll now probably dive into a little demo. I'll be using React and I18 Next.js. IT Next is an internationalization framework that allows all this to be possible. Why I'm familiar with this, but there are other libraries that are available for that. They also have good documentation and support for issues. Another thing probably we might see and touch is JavaScript's wow, this API, ECMAScript's API for that. And yeah, that's probably what we're going to do. Yeah, so this is basically how an React app. I will show you a bit of the code that has all this. As you can see, this is just mostly React, and then we have I've already started translating some of these things, and I'll take you through how you translate maybe another bit of it. And yeah, but before that, I just want to show you probably what we may go through. We want to translate things that have text, anything that in patterns, labels, and dates. So first and foremost, at least we have a button that just says change to Kiswahili or change to English. And if we change to Kiswahili, that should show this particular text in Kiswahili. So there are infinitely many kinds of beautiful lives. And if we change to Kiswahili, kuna aina nyingi za maisha mazuri. And the date as well should change. This isn't changed completely. And I'll show you what we're going to do to have this all in Kiswahili. So first things first, I'll explain how you probably want I18 next in your code. And of course, you will import I18 next JS, React I18 as we're using React. We have I18 next HTTP backend. That's used for cases where you want your translations in a different location, or you want them coming in from a separate domain. So all that setup is probably done with this. This has just a default configuration, and now we use the public folder, but I18 allows you to have all the configurations such that maybe you want them from a different domain. Next, we would probably want a browser detector. That's just to detect the browser language as the name specifies there. And then this is how you would do it. You just say I18, and then you say use the backend, use the language detector, and then you pass the instance, and then you initialize all that. And right now I'm just setting debug to true in case there's any particular issue, but this is normally set to false, and then a fallback language. And the other thing, I think this is just a bare minimum setup for this. I have a separate demo where I still use the same bare minimum setup. The other thing you would want to do is just import, if I can open the index file, you just want to import this into your, at least where your root index, at least, so that you just drop this here and React will take over from there. The other thing you want to do is just provide a suspense from React, because this is loaded asynchronously. So if without this, it probably will not work in that regard. So that's basically that. The other thing I wanted to say was, since I'm using I18 next HTTP backend, we want our locales in the public folder. But then again, this can be set up to work differently. You can have your locales within your source folder, but I would recommend just having them outside. But depending on your setup, you can change all that. So I'd explain that some things have already been translated. Like, for example, this is a particular key. We use use translation hook from React IET next. And that has, at least we have T. T is what we'll use to translate. And then we also have the IET instance, which we set up here. And that picks up the particular instance you are using. And so T, and then all our, I would say, strings are object-based. So you'll just read the particular key from there. So in this particular case, I'm saying fast text on page, and there we have an object, or at least this is the JSON file. We have the key that says there are infinitely many kinds of beautiful lives, and then we have another key that says today is, and then that passes a variable. I'll get to that in a minute, but this is the first thing that's translated there. And so we have T and then the first key that's there, and then that's basically it if you want a particular translation to be done. The other thing is that you also want your other languages. In this case, it's just Swahili, so it's just one language, and then you have your translation. And then this is just a basic string, and that is why you can at least see the translation in Kiswahili there. Now, the next bit I'd like to touch a little on is we have another case where there would be cases where you want to pass variables into your strings. Let's say you want to say there's something that changed. You want a particular label or phrase to be dynamic, and so you'd pass in variables in that particular context. But in this case, so that means, just to take you back a little, IET provides some interpolation for you. And so you can provide all that just by passing a second variable in an object. You can name it whatever you want, but as long as the variable, at least there, is passed in the same way. So in this case, today is that. And in Kiswahili, we have Leonie, and then we have the variable there. Now, you may be wondering, probably, we have Leonie, but we still have Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022. So this is not Kiswahili. So most of your projects may have a combination of a framework and maybe your native, what do you call it, your native date functions or libraries that are already present for you. So in this particular case, we're using JavaScript's Internationalization API, and that provides a date format for us. So right now it's still in English. And so what we do want in this particular case is to provide, IET next language. So we want to provide a particular, at least the language that we currently are using. And this is, in this particular case, at least we can see Leonie Jumatano to Marchi 2022. So JavaScript's date format, at least from the API itself, allows you to provide various options for that. And this is just formatting today's date. And then we want the whole date to be in a full style, and the time as well to be as long. So all these options are provided. The documentation is there in Firefox. So at least for now, we can see some bits are in Kiswahili. At least these two strings which are here are in Kiswahili. So another interesting thing we're going to probably dive into is this particular variable, and I'll talk about how we're going to translate this. So at least we have, you click the button and then count. So in React, we have like a piece of state that we've set here, and the original, it starts with 0. And count here is the count we currently are on. So to update, at least when I do click this, you can see the count is changing. Now we want to change this whole string to at least be in Kiswahili. So what we will do, at least if you're probably starting along, you would probably just say, let's remove this, and we'll come here, and then we can say, let's just call it at least why that happens. So we can say phrase. Yeah, so you click the button that, maybe we can add the word times. Time or time, yeah, let's start with time. Yeah, so as much as we have, let me just take this back here. As much as we have a way to provide some interpolation, we also need to provide pluralities. And so this phrase will probably change. So let's say if it was that, this is going to be sort of static, right? So 0 times, 1 times. So it's not providing the full context. At least it should be, you click the button 1 time. So I18 allows you to provide at least a pluralities bit of it. So you probably change your key to have something like, in this case, this can be for 1. And then if you say, we can do the same, we can provide a plurality key. So at least for I18, you just say other, and then this will have the S. And the only thing now left is to say at T, and then we say, I think it was phrase. Pass in phrase, and then we pass in the count. The count here being the count of the state we have initially. And so if I would just change to English at least for a moment, at least it will still see 0 times. That still sort of makes sense. When we click this shows 1 time. And now at least that translation happens. So in Kiswahili, I guess we can use the word bonyeza. I don't know if bonyeza works. I'll go with bonyeza for now. I'll copy these two and then have this in my translation file. Oh, this, figure out why that is happening. Maybe we can also add some context. Oops. Add more context. So add maybe 1 time only. So cases where if it's 1, and then in Kiswahili, you'd see how the context is going to be different. So I'll use Google Translate. I'm not a linguist, but I hope you get the gist in this particular case. So this is, say, 1 time only. So I'll use bonyeza, bonyeza. Yeah. So this will be something like that. So bonyeza. Face button, mara, and then the count, and then you just say 2. And then we have something else here, at least for plurals, we would have ulibonyeza kitufe mara that. Oops, this is, sorry for that. That is English, should be here. And then have that. So ulibonyeza kitufe mara something, whatever the count is, 2. This will probably be for 1, and this will be for multiple strings. So in this case, so at least that shows up 1 time and then 2 times. Then the only string is not there anymore. So I18 is smart enough to know, based on what you provided, that from 2 onwards, that is a plural key. So if we change to Kiswahili, at least we can see that. And if we start it all again, at least you'll see 0. And then if you do an update, that would be ulibonyeza mara moja too, something like to that extent. And that's pretty much what you would need to do in that regard. These strings like have a nice day would be probably like siku njema. Let's see. Nice day. And then we have a nice day, exclamation. Then you can copy this here. This schema thing. Not sure. Yes, this is. And then your phrase is going to change. And then you reference that key because it's object-based. Nice day. Yep. And then we have, at least this is just a bare setup for all this. You can click that, and then you have siku njema. As well, click to update. This can be translated as well. I was just showing at least these. This would be something like bonyeza kuhasisisha, I think. Sasisha, yeah. But I hope you just get the gist. You can just use the T, at least with this particular library, T, and then you translate all this in that particular version to have that particular translation, sorry. Yeah, so that's basically that as a demo. If I can jump into what you probably want to do. So yeah, in cases where you have an existing project, there are situations where you would like to now use pseudo localization. Pseudo localization is just sort of pre-translating some things using accents, direction, and a lot of other things you may need to see so that you can just see the app. How does the app respond to different languages, character lengths, and the like? So I'll quickly jump into that. So I already have a built-in example. I won't take too much time within the code, but the setup is the same. I will just show you at least this particular example. If you change this to Kiswahili, and at least you can see that, and then you have everything probably needs to be translated for sure. I will use an existing, as you can see, it dynamically changes based on all that. I will just use that. This is all with existing backend. I will first show you how maybe it would look like if you have an error message from the backend. Yes, vitambulisho batili, valid credentials, and at least if we do log in, we land here. So at least for Kiswahili, I tried to translate as much as I could here in Kiswahili. You can see some of the things here are translated. I'll get to why these are not translated in a bit. And all this is translated. So let me touch a little on localization. Let me just change to English for a second, because that's what we want to at least address. So pseudo localization. So I'll comment some bit of my code here, and I'll show you why. that's if you have an existing project, you can probably start sudo localization. There are libraries, at least in JS, we have something called sudo localization, which does that for you. So I've just added this to my app routes folder. And so you can see all this it's just trying to stretch your application. And the theme I have with Tailwind at least allows that particular scenario to occur fine. So all that is at least fairly working. So you'd probably start off this way just to see how things stretch and all. In this particular case, it's too long, so it wraps around. So you want to test out, or at least performance test, quote unquote, your CSS, because we fight a lot with CSS as front-end devs. But overall, you want to see how are you actually ready for sudo localization. This is one way to probably just start it off. So, and probably the interest of time, I will jump right quick into common problem patterns and some of the best practices. Yes, so let me just comment sudo localization out for a moment and jump into this. Yeah, I want to explain all this. Okay. So first problem pattern is of course, hard-coded strings. Everything needs to be translated for sure. From buttons to labels to placeholders, all that needs to change, or at least be in your translation file, at least your single source of, your base file, your single source of truth, and make sure that at least make sure it's localizable. At least there's a key for it in your translation file. You probably want to have pre-commit hook linters just to ensure that's fine. If I can show you at least within the app. So at least we've already seen bits of this, but there are cases where hard-coded strings like this, at least when we saw sudo localization, this was not translated correctly. Maybe if I just show you again. It's not localized. So you'll probably catch all this. You'll catch all hard-coded strings when you do a sudo localization, all things that are probably just messing with your code. If you do sudo localizations, that just helps you know where you are if you want to start doing internationalization. So hard-coded strings, no, is a no-no for you. Another probably issue you may face is concatenation. Let me just comment this out. Concatenation is, you don't want to concatenate strings at all. Why? Is because you lose context for particular examples, and that is, when you lose context, you lose meaning, and that already jumps into poor user experience. I think in Kiswahili this would be weird. I think I need to manufacture that. Probably should have the language selection. Yeah, so concatenation, as you can see, if you in this particular case, I concatenated. I'm just showing you how these issues can show up. In this particular case, I had the variable and then the translation and then the number and then the translation. This is it's not good. As you can see in Kiswahili, this doesn't read so well. So as much as the functionality is fine, the sentence doesn't read that well. So you want to avoid concatenation, and you can do that by probably using variables, as I've mentioned here. Don't do it way too much. Of course, there'll be a different approach. In cases where maybe you wanted to say a user was updated or user X was updated, you don't necessarily have to use a variable. You can use probably generic phrases like the entry was updated, the entry was created, just to have it as simple as possible. But if you still want that dynamic aspect to it, you can use variables. At least I18 provides that. The other thing I think I want to talk about is uppercasing and lowercasing. Yes. So I don't think Swahili has all these issues, or some that I've encountered yet, but German has cases where a lowercase value is different when you put it to uppercase. Then that is via CSS or JS. So you want a case where you want to avoid anything that deals with title cases, lower casing, avoid all that. In this particular example, you can see, I think this probably means intelligence. I can't be sure, but as you can see, I can't select this other S. And if we do an inspection, at least in the DOM, we can see that it's different. There's this F, I think it's a sharp S. And so as much as it may be okay, maybe in German, but we want cases where you want the translation file to be the source of truth. And so your CSS, JS should sort of not be there. So those are cases where you have to probably talk to your designer and probably make them aware that you're changing the cases here so that it's just probably just as the translation say. That is that. But there are cases where you are still insistent and you can't avoid probably the casing. And so that means then you don't want to add casing to one character at a time. You have to do the whole, rather do the whole phrase in that particular context. And then let's say you're doing searches, like you're searching for a particular word, you probably want to make them, they should be insensitive. Yeah, make local sensitive. Yeah, local sensitive functions. Yeah, that means it could be insensitive such that when you search for something, it knows it can pick a wide range of things. It can pick the capital one, can be the small one, and that particular direction. Yes, I think CSS as well. Yeah, text expansions. I guess I've manufactured something here. It's this. Yeah. So you want cases where your styling should be flexible enough. At least this particular theme is flexible. This is something that I have I've changed. I've removed all the flexibleness, if I can put it that way, of this pattern. So you need to make sure it wraps correctly and all that. That isn't too bad. So one interesting example I do have, at least in Assamese, Assamese is a language in India. There are cases where I think I did face this, where your font, the font you're using doesn't support a particular character correctly, and so you have to make sure your font supports all the languages that you're having. So be sure that your font is the fonts you're using in your CSS support a wide array of locales, or at least the ones that you're working with in that particular scenario. And then, of course, we have localization of dates. I think that's the next thing. Oh no, this is problem patterns dealing with standard local codes. So JavaScript, at least with the ECMAScript API. They support a wide array of locales, so you can specify a lot of them. So they could be English US, English UK. In this case, they also support traditional Chinese, simplified Chinese. Yeah, so you want your code to support all this, and probably you'd lean on to the ECMAScript API, but at least I've learned of late that Tagalog, I think it's spoken in the Philippines, it's not supported. So if you're supporting that locale, you need to be careful, or you need to find something that's standard for that particular locale. So at least when we started translating our app, we realized that using at least shorter versions, like at least for Chinese Taiwan, you need to provide the whole locale, because this particular section is a script, and those scripts are necessary because traditional Chinese in Taiwan is different from simplified Chinese in Taiwan. And so this particular script is what you would want to also handle in your application. So at least the JavaScript ECMAScript, the ECMAScript API provides a section where you can provide the script in that regard. So there's also things like Serbian Cyrillic, and then there's Serbian Latin, and they have different scripts. Yeah, go here. So left to right and right to left support is also needed. And those are very important, because if you're supporting languages, let's say in the Middle East, things like Hebrew, Urdu, Arabic, you need to make sure your application is flexible enough for that. If I can show you that, look there. So at least HTML itself has a dir property. So if I say right to left in this particular locale, everything should be mirrored. This is still loading. And yeah, so you can see things are mirrored, and such tests help so that you can see what is breaking. This whole menu should actually be on this side when it's in a right to left scenario. As you can see, some of this, the CSS is broken here. So all this also can be done with the sudo localization. I think you can provide, I forgot to touch on that a little, but you can provide a bi-directional strategy such that your application has mirrored strings for you, so that it mirrors strings for you, so that you can see how things behave in a at least right to left scenario. Update is done, so I'll just do that. So if you are supporting right to left languages, ensure your application properly mirrors a right to left context. Yeah. Yes, another thing you probably will face more often than not, or at least maybe you face them, is the particular libraries and native function that you're using. And that is normally becomes a real nightmare. So some libraries don't provide everything. So I'll in this particular context, I'll show you. These strings aren't translated per se, but this is in Kiswahili. And at least the date calendar library I'm using here is React date picker. And you can see, at least if you pick a different date, at least for a US locale, it will change the date appropriately. French locale, I think French uses day, month, year. So, and at least you can see it's translated appropriately here with the days of the week, and the months of the year are in French. And now, since the app is in Kiswahili, Kiswahili is not supported, which is sad. This is mainly because date FNS is being used under the hood with React date picker. So if I can probably just open that for a moment. Date FNS doesn't support Swahili in this particular context. So if we search for Swahili, yeah, it's not there. So you will face probably a couple of these scenarios depending on your locale. At least I know Swahili is not supported by DateFNS. Urdu isn't supported by DateFNS. So you reach probably interesting scenarios. And so you have to most probably talk to your localization manager and probably the designer as well, so that you can see how you can avoid this. In our context, when I think we were using Urdu, and Urdu is not supported by DateFNS itself, Urdu from India. And so what we did, we disabled this calendar picker and allowed the user to type the date. Yeah, so those are the interesting hacks you have to do, but you have to communicate these with your designer and the localization manager as well. So this is what I was just talking about, some of the decisions you have to make. So those are normally small fixes, but ideally in such a scenario, you may want to provide a date mask. So date masks that are flexible to every locale at least. But that's a long-term strategy because you need to now decide, at least make your code flexible enough to switch based on the locale. Another thing that's not, at least we did face or you may face is, as much as I-18 is really good, it doesn't support some locales, or at least what I found out. I think Swahili is supported. I think they made a fix for that. Can't be too sure, but Zulu for sure isn't supported in terms of pluralities. So there are cases where I think I-18 allows you to, or at least you probably need to provide a plurality rule for that particular locale, and that's what we actually did at that particular time. So those are just some of the interesting things you'll face, at least when it's when you have libraries or native functions. I think I should have touched on, yeah. So sometimes I think the ECMAScript API should provide all the languages right now, but I think Urdu from India wasn't supported as well. So you'd still find cases where AM and PM. So be sure that your locale is supported at that particular point. And if it's not, you probably have to escalate and talk to your designer, architect, probably your senior engineers as well. And probably you've already seen them as a civil engineer if you are in that position. But yeah, just to conclude, so depending on your release cycles, some fixes will take long, and so you have to be careful. You can probably do the quick fixes, like the one I've mentioned, where you disable the calendar picker for that locale, but they can still type the date correctly. The only issue is it will be a poor user experience in terms of maybe some locales allow it and why not others. So that's probably what you need to, maybe you can point it out in your release notes so that whoever is using can be aware of that. So of course you'll have to be in meetings. Yeah, meetings are annoying, but you'll still have to be in meetings with the design team, the localization manager, so that you can discuss these user experiences that are probably going to be broken now that you have internationalization, or at least that locale involved. Yeah, and as with all architectures, it's always a marathon and it's not a sprint. So it takes time. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it on that front. And maybe one day you can reach a point where you say you're international and you can check the statistics. Yeah, I think I've covered pretty much what I wanted to cover today. Um, Ryan, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. That was really illuminating. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to speak up or also post them in the chat here on the call or on the YouTube chat. I guess I'll go ahead with my question first. So
Sure.
what does the continuous workflow look like in practice? For example, for teams with short 2-week sprints, do they always need to have translators on hand on the team in order to release features at the end of the sprint?
Interesting. So I'd probably ask, when you say translators on the team, like part of the core team?
Right. Like, because I imagine like in short sprints where teams want to ship things fast, that translation work to make everything localized to a specific language would be a bottleneck. Does that happen? Yeah.
Yeah. So at least on our team, we haven't reached the continuous workflow yet, but we're aiming to get there. As the translators aren't necessarily on our team per se, they're a third party. So in that regard, we would send, say, we want product 111. Here's the English file. Translate it for us. And now the vendors will now, at least on that, the vendor in that particular context will have their translators and their linguists to do all that. They'll be testing the app and then they'll do that front. So they aren't necessarily on your team per se. That's what I can say. If you can have them, but I would, I, I don't know. I don't know if your team would want linguists. Depends on the
I see. So you're not able to have like continuous delivery because you need that translation done first, right?
You can maybe you can have the translations continuously. So let's say only that there'll be permanent projects. Like if you're having one zero zeros, product 100, right? And you already send the English file. They can translate it even within the day, depending on what it is. And then say you want there's a probably an issue in production that's really critical, and so you have to release 101. So you'd probably at least you'd on that end, maybe your localization manager will open a new project on the vendor side, because it's they have, at least in its context, a lot of things have gone to the cloud. So you probably open a new project and say product 101, here's the English file, linguists please translate for us, and so they can do it immediately. And so what all, at least on the application side or the engineer side, is just to pull the translations and load the app. So if you have that set up, at least with their REST API, you should be good to go. I hope that's answered.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Jojo asks, how does this work with accessibility?
Accessibility, that's an interesting question. Let me think about this. I can't say too sure how it does. Maybe if your job is to really deal with accessibility, like you want, of course, you need accessibility on the web app. I can't say too sure if we've ever reached a situation like that. Most of the time, I would say is just if it's better to use something that's more of an accessibility particular type of thing. So let's put it like this. you want most of the time your strings to be translated. So if you're in a case where now a lot of your users or a couple of your users are uh, having accessibility issues, that means probably you have to deal with code on your end, if I can put it that way. There's something that's not accessible correctly. Maybe the linguists can mention, or as they go through it, can mention that, hey, this string is not the best. Can we change this to something that's easily accessible on your front? Because we've never really faced that type of scenario. I don't know if I've answered it too much, but maybe we can have more on a chat on that. Yeah.
Right. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I hope my my click to up, is it click? I think, is it click? Click means is bonyeza. I normally hear what they say bonyeza. I hope that's the correct translation. Anyway, I'm not a linguist, but yeah.
Great. Thank you, Hawi. Thank you very much for this session. And thank you also everyone for all the great comments on the chat for Hawi. We'll end this. And if you liked this and you're watching from YouTube, bonyeza the subscribe button and the like button as well.
Yes.
And yeah, have a good rest of your day.